how's it going? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
So I'm sure you remember how we first met many years ago. I had just started as a salesperson at the chemical company while you were at Fortitech, and Fortitech was one of our biggest customers. And we were in New York for a trade show. And so our two companies got together for breakfast at this big long table at a restaurant in New York. And lucky you got stuck all the way at the end next to the new guy that didn't know anything. And I'm not a big talker as it goes to begin with. And I'm sure you probably wanted to jump out a window.
No, I remember getting there. I remember bringing the team there for breakfast. And I just remember not sure exactly, obviously, very important products and stuff and services that you provided to Fortitech. And obviously, the company had a long-standing relationship between our buyers and your sales folks and some of the people who are involved in that leadership. And I do remember totally sitting down with you, not knowing what to expect. I think I knew a little bit about your position, a little bit about some relationships that existed within your position, but had no idea what to expect. But I do remember I don't know, I felt like we instantly hit it off. There was a theme, or there was just a feeling about how we approach business, how we approach life, that just really just connected from that first breakfast. And I believe technically we were in New Jersey, because I think that's where the Supply Side East was that year. It wasn't down at the Javits Center. It was a much smaller facility, I think near the Meadowlands area of New Jersey. But absolutely, I remember that breakfast very well. And I was trying to remember what year that was.
Oh, gosh, I don't even want to. It could be 12 or 15 years ago. But it's funny,
Yeah.
you never know what happens when you meet folks. And then, of course, we'll get into the story. But, from that meeting, I don't know if I even talked to you again, except for several years later when I invited you to be on the board at Joe's Chemical. And then now you're on the board of my company. So it's funny how things turn out.
Yeah, pretty exciting.
So when you perhaps run into somebody, you're getting coffee, like in a business or a professional context, what's your elevator pitch? How do you describe who you are?
Excellent. I did a short stint at GE Capital. No, joking. This is a joke with my kids. I think you've always had to be prepared to talk about who you are and what you're doing. And at different phases of my career, it was in my finance role, CFO role, COO role. Today, it's really about how am I being an effective board member and helping other people and other organizations succeed. And I'm really transitioning from being a doer to being someone that helps others actually do. And that's a transition that we'll probably talk about a little bit later here in the program. But that's really my goal right now, is to be the best board member I can be for the organizations and companies I'm involved with.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to that part of your story, because I think it's a really interesting transition from being a internal C-level leader to now being a board member. But why don't you give us the 5-minute spiel of your career and how it progressed from the beginning to today?
Yeah, early on, I had maybe a few key things that were very important to me. I can remember sitting at a kitchen table when I was 12, and my father handing me a Texas Instrument calculator. So before we were using computers and laptops, and he had to run some financial numbers for a organizational redesign that he was involved with. He was actually on the union side of it with the union rep as a union president within the paper industry. And I remember, because I was pretty good at math at the time, when I enjoyed those things, and I was always looking to be involved with things like that, he's, listen, this is for you. You're going to keep this calculator, but I need some help. And so I remember the responsibility of putting those numbers together and not really knowing where it was going to go. And I really felt like that was something that maybe, I'm interested in business, I'm interested in finance. And I saw how the two were interrelated, but then I didn't really think about it much. Went through high school, played sports, was very involved in soccer, basketball, and baseball. I was probably, back in the day, a little more of a 3-sport athlete, but soccer being the sport I was probably the most passionate about. And that kind of drove me for competition and other things and led to some of the college things that I decided to do. But when I got out of college, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I knew it was something in business. I thought about being an officer in the Air Force. I actually got accepted to do that. And then what really happened was I got into a program with the General Electric company, the financial management program. And so I look back at kind of the foundation. I was probably 22 years old, 21, 22 when I got in that program. And when I look at the work ethic my parents instilled in me, when I look at the sports and the things that happened, the financial management program was probably the first time they threw me into a truly professional business environment, threw me in with a lot of people who were a lot smarter than I was, probably went to a lot better schools. I still don't know how I got in the program. They hadn't taken anybody out of my university, a small private college in upstate New York. But I think I interviewed well and I made the right connections. And I made the connections to get in that program. I was working from 6 in the morning till 10, running a Nautilus center in the YMCA in Schenectady, New York. And then the rest of the day I was interviewing. And then sometimes I would work at night because I needed enough hours to support myself. I was dating my wife, who I've been now married to for 35 years, but we were dating at the time. She was also in the Schenectady area. So that financial management program is really what drove me through my career. And that was a footprint that's set in place, fairly long career with GE, moving through different financial responsibilities within what we refer to now as GE Energy. But back then it was GE Power Systems. Obviously, they were a diversified conglomerate. And then coming off program, I knew I wanted to work in international, and I had an opportunity to be in a quasi-international location, which was Puerto Rico, but responsible for all of Central and South America for the power systems, the aftermarket business, doing all the engineering services, all the parts. And then just started a progressive, more responsible controller, financial manager, and analysis positions, eventually CFO positions. Followed one of my mentors to Case Corporation and actually moved many times, moved from New York with GE to Virginia, back to New York, to Puerto Rico, to Connecticut, and then followed one of my mentors out to Wisconsin and joined a company called Case Corporation, which eventually became C&H Global, in a financial role that really defined my career at that point and allowed me to move offshore, move to Brazil, and set up an agricultural business in Brazil as the CFO of that business. And then moving on from there, did that assignment for a couple years, moved down to another city in Brazil after an acquisition. So Fiat and New Holland bought Case. We became C&H Global. And I worked on the integration for a year and moved an organization down. And we can talk more about that a little bit later. And then repatriated back to actually GE. Was pulled back into GE about the time that Jack Welch was retiring and Jeff Immelt was leaving medical systems to go to corporate, and went to a role in GE Medical Systems and probably did some things that are very aligned with the IT technology space, because it was really the technology part of the medical systems business that GE was investing in. And we bought a almost $500 million business from a private individual in Milwaukee and made that the basis for the technology group, which was almost a $2 billion group. And I became CFO of basically the domestic America's piece of that, if you looked at a three-pole setup. And at that point in my career, I think my kids were probably about 4 and 5.5 at that time. I think we'd lived in 8 different homes. I was having a wonderful career. My wife was trying to keep her professorship going and raise our kids. And I decided that it was time to get off the corporate America escalator in 2001. And not because I wasn't having a great career, not because I didn't love it, but I just was having a hard time figuring out how I was going to align my priorities and responsibilities with the kind of leader I wanted to be, the kind of father I wanted to be, the kind of husband I wanted to be. So I really looked at what was the next steps for me. I went and interviewed with some of my mentors, had moved on to other companies in different parts of the world, but I'd come across this company when I was actually living in Brazil and flying out of an airport in Campinas. And I had always had an interest in the nutrition business. I followed it on the side, even though I'd never worked in nutrition. I followed everything from the vitamin price fixing that went on in the late 90s. I just always had an interest in that business. I didn't really know how to get into it, but I had an interest. And then when I decided to make that move, I remember this company that I used to drive by that was building a plant, and I had heard they were headquartered in actually Schenectady, New York, where I'd lived a long time, where I'd been with GE, the roots of my career with GE in the financial management program. And so I reached out to them. And at that time, I think they maybe had an assistant controller, a finance person. I don't even think they had an HR person. It was a fairly small company. They were like, oh, two of the owners aren't here. They're in Asia to show at Food Ingredients Asia, which I wouldn't even know what that meant at the time. And I just kept pursuing it. And then they did a search for what they were calling a VP of finance, because they had 4 officers that had founded the company. 3 of them were actively running it as CEO, as chief of revenue officer and chief technical officer. But they had not brought in a non-owner executive. And so I went through that process. I learned afterwards they had about 100 resumes. They decided they were going to talk to 10 people, and they brought 3 people in for interviews. And unbeknownst to me, I ended up competing with the GE guy in the area that I knew, but we never knew until after. Like, he called me after when I got the position. I never knew he was interviewing for it. And that was really the turning point. That's when I became the CFO of Fortitech. I got into the nutrition business. I got into a culture that totally aligned with family and business. The rest is history from there. Successfully grew that organization into a global multinational. 2008, I was also promoted to chief operating officer. In 2010, we sold 40% of the company to Trilantic Capital Partners, a PE firm in New York. 2012, we sold the entire company to DSM. And from 2012 to 2015, I ran the integration with a member of DSM's group, and then was ultimately running the entire division until I left in mid-2015 timeframe, at which time you had reached out to me about figuring out, hey, can you join our board? And I actually got them to do a carve out, even though I was locked out of the business for a while, to join the board. So the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig in on Fortitech some, but before that, I'm just curious, what was the culture like at GE at that time with Jack and Jeff there? What was it like?
Yeah, I'll tell you. My experience is mostly with Jack Welch time period running everything. An intense culture. If you're not 1 and 2 of your business, you're either going to exit it or figure out how to be 1 or 2. Culture of performance, putting together financial, putting together session C, which was the human resource planning. And I tell you, I thrived in that culture. I loved the competitiveness of that culture. I also saw some sides of it that were, to me, not how I would want to be representative in treating people. I thought it sometimes almost went too far. It became a little too cutthroat. I always believed in praising in public and doing discipline or doing developmental stuff in a more private setting. And so I had some reservations with some of the approaches that were going on. And ultimately, I think it did have some impacts over the company over the long period of time and in a changing culture. So although there was a lot of great things that came out of that, I also learned some other things about how I would want to treat people and how I would want to run organizations when I had that responsibility and authority. Because I didn't always have that back then. I was a smaller cog in a bigger wheel back then. So I couldn't make the same influence I could in a position like Fortitech.
So one of the stories I always heard about GE was it was something along the lines of every year at the performance review time, people would get ranked on some scale. And if you were at the bottom of that, it was basically you're terminated.
Yeah, basically there were code 1s and code 2s and then code 3s. If you were a 1, you're high flyer, you're going up the escalator. If you were a 2, you were solid in what you do. They may not see you going more than 2 levels above where you are, but you're solid and you're part of the organization. If you were a 3, they're weaning you out of the organization. And it was that cutthroat.
Challenging environment.
It's a very challenging environment.
I want to get into Fortitech because that's obviously the part of your career that I know the most about because we were in the same space. Talk through what Fortitech did as a business, where they fit in kind of the nutritional supply chain, and really that journey of why you brought on private equity, what was that like, and then ultimately the full exit to a strategic.
So Fortitech was founded, and I wasn't there at the founding of it, but it was founded on the premise of some couple founders had worked in the industry and had actually trouble getting the ingredients or getting the premixes they needed to support their nutritional products. They had both come out of a very strong background in microbiology and technical related to the infant formula industry in the baby food area. And they were, particularly the founder, was having trouble buying these products, which so it drove his idea for a business plan. And there were companies in this space, but most of the large companies in this space at the time, which is Roche Vitamins, which eventually become DSM, BASF, which is a big basic chemical company, but a lot of these vitamins stuff come from basic chemical processes. They were trying to put together these mixes of vitamins and minerals and other functional food ingredients. Obviously, Minerals is the company you're referring to in St. Louis and how we met. And what was interesting for them is they wanted to be able to provide a service in this space, but almost be a little bit agnostic on where they're buying these from, who they're buying them from. They want to put the best products together for the food ingredient space. So they fit in that they would put these blends of vitamins and minerals together and sell to the who's who of the food, beverage, and pharmaceutical space. So I'll throw a couple names out on the big food space and infant formula space and adult nutrition space. You can talk Nestle, you can talk Abbott, you could talk Friesland Campina in Europe. There's a host of companies that are in this space. There's the beverage industry, the Cokes, the Pepsis, all the types of products that came along, like vitamin water and other nutritional products. The whole protein movement with putting together protein shakes, could be diet related, could be for adult nutrition, could be for senior nutrition. They also sold a lot of products into the quasi-pharma dietary supplement space. So they really fit nicely in that they weren't out in the market competing to what products were on the store shelves, right? That was bigger brands. That was companies going B2C. This was a B2B business that was there to support the customers. And ultimately, that's what really drove the premise for the business. And we made a decision early on, particularly when I got there at the end of 2001, 2002, how do we move beyond the U.S. borders? They had just built a plant just before I got there, which is why I saw the company called Fortitech down in Campinas, Brazil. Wasn't really going that well in their first year or two. Obviously, I had experience working in Brazil, so that was attractive to them. The GE background, financial management, where they wanted to take the company. So in 2001, less than 50 million in sales, maybe 5% EBITDA. Their first plant outside the U.S. not going extremely well, but they had an amazing product. They had amazing technical ability, respected with all their customers, and the trajectory looks strong. But the interesting part is we bought products from everybody we competed with because BASF and Roche were all basic vitamin manufacturers. So it was an interesting relationship. So in 2002, we put together a joint venture with BASF, and BASF exited the premix business. And those companies are always afraid to do it because they figured they were getting one step removed from their customers. They may sell them straight ingredients, but if they sell the ingredients to a company like Fortitech and Fortitech puts together these premixes, then they're kind of getting removed from what they see as their customer. But that was kind of the trend at the time.
Well, interesting point. So, as you blend of vitamins and minerals that you're selling to an Abbott or a Nestle, so why, from Abbott or Nestle's perspective, why are they buying a premix versus the individual ingredients and doing it themselves?
Because there's a lot of work that's involved with buying the ingredients, warehousing ingredients, testing the ingredients, tracking all the shelf lines for the ingredients, actually blending that ingredient together to get it in their finished product. And so there's a lot of costs associated with it, a lot of tests. And although it seems pretty simple to put all these micro ingredients into a macro product, it's not as straightforward as it looks. And at that time, there were other small privately held companies, maybe multi-generational family companies that were in this space. And then there were these very large companies, like I had mentioned, DSM, which is Roche Vitamins at the time, BASF. And no one had really come in and taken over this space with a very professional approach, but not from the standpoint of multi-generational family business or a large corporation. And this was a real niche that Fortitech carved out and really showed the value added and how these larger companies could save money, save time, have less issues with their products, and really drove the value home on why it was a better proposition for them to purchase these products from a Fortitech than to purchase them from one of the large manufacturing distributors of vitamins, or do it themselves. So it was an easy outsourcing decision.
And as a result, Fortitech's growth, they have rapid growth.
Yeah, we grew, other than 2008, we grew double-digit top line every year. And even during the financial crisis, we just came in under it. It was 9 point something. And we would tend to grow EBITDA, twice as much as we were growing sales. So, but we probably averaged, somewhere 14 to 17% top line growth over a period from 2002 to 2000.
There were other large competitors at the time, I believe, like DSM, for example. They have a premix business.
Correct.
So,
they bought Roche Vitamins, correct.
So what was the secret about Fortitech that they were able to outcompete these big multinational companies?
Really, I think there's some core principles. One is looking at the performance of turning around products that were custom blended in commodity lead times. So we drove the ability to be able to essentially put these products together, have the right mix of raw materials, have our production and blending set up and our testing set up, that we could deliver the products in 4 weeks. That was not going on prior to Fortitech, and it really isn't going on today, but there were some other challenges during the COVID crisis and inventory, so we can talk more about that later. But at that time, we set the bar in the industry, and it really started off with, on the sales side of things, when customers wanted a formulation, we would communicate with them within 24 hours of request. Our goal would be ship a sample within 48 hours and be able to pull some products together unless there was some special ingredient that took more time, and to be able to work with them on a formulation with their technical group. And our goal was that we already had a purchase order and we're supplying a product before other customers even got back to them. So that velocity of business was the key starter. On-time deliveries, meeting that 4-week delivery time, and then obviously quality products. If you don't have a quality product, you had to set that as that was your benchmark. And I think we just did that better than everybody else in the industry for a long period of time.
It's amazing what a difference that makes. As we've said, we were a supplier to you and had many other customers, and we had the same philosophy, right? So we would get samples out within 24 hours, and we would hear from our customers that our competitors might take 6 months to give them the sample.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's not that complicated, right? You think it's pretty simple, but a lot of people have trouble, and a lot of organizations have trouble executing it.
So tell me more about the time at Fortitech when you started the thought process of bringing in a capital partner, what really drove that, and what it was like when you first started partnering with private equity.
Yeah, excellent. I think it evolved over a fairly long period of time, because one is the CEO of the company, the main founder, and obviously myself as the CFO. People approach us all the time to buy us. From the day I walked in the company, it was going on a lot before. And, I think they looked at selling a couple times before I was there. During the first 3 to 5 years, people were coming pretty hard to us. We would always talk to them. We wouldn't share financials. If we did, we'd share a one-pager. We kept the dialogue open because we wanted as much information as we could have about what those possibilities would be. But I would say somewhere around 2008, we were growing pretty rapidly. The organization was expanding. The amount of people that could report to one person being the founder of the company wasn't sustainable to have 20 people reporting to him anymore. And that's when really we carved out the chief operating officer role, and we split up the company and how to be more effective as leaders. And also at that point in 2008, we started talking a little more seriously about what could be an exit for the company. We had one of the 4 founders was mainly a family member and a father of the founder, and he was not really involved in the business at that point. There were really 3 main founders running it. One of the founders was probably getting close to retirement. He was quite a bit older than the other two. And so they needed to make some decisions on what would be the next step for the organization. We had blown through and were probably a little too big to try to do like some type of ESOP or employee buyout. We talked about it a bit, but we probably missed that window based on where the company was, the growth was. We talked about outright selling to a strategic. We had a number of companies come through. We talked. We never hired anybody to search it or shop it, but we kept talking. We would meet with companies. We would meet with our competitors who were also our suppliers, which made an interesting dynamic. But we kept just doing our thing, pushing forward, doing our thing. But the founders were very clear that they were not going to make this a legacy business and hand this over to family members. They wanted family to go off and do what family wanted to do. And they felt there would be an exit at some point. And ultimately, we decided, just happened to be having a conversation with some of our bankers, some that we told we weren't going to hire because we weren't going to actively shop it. We weren't going to lose focus on the business. But if there were some things that were opportunistic, we'd be willing to talk. And we just decided internally that going the PE route would involve the four founders being able to take a certain amount of chips off the table and then go for a bigger swing at things. And then be able to, for the founders, get a second bite of the apple, so to speak, in terms of the exit strategy, and that the top people in the company, let's call it 55 out of the 550 we had at the time before we sold it. And those 55 people were in the US, they were in Denmark, they were in Malaysia, they were in Brazil, they could be in Mexico, California facility. We give an opportunity for everybody to align and have a incentive program that allowed a great income for a lot of people. And ultimately, that was the path we chose. So we went through, we didn't look at a lot of private equity firms. We had some reach out to us. We mainly partnered with one that our bankers introduced us to, and at the time our bankers were Bank of America. We had a lot of connections with them, and they introduced us to Trilantic Capital Partners. And we worked on strictly a deal with them. And because we were very cash flow positive, we were growing our business, our velocity of business was working. We didn't need the capital to fund our growth. We used it as an accelerant to accelerate an ultimate exit and to make sure we were aligned with what we would need to do to have a strategic sale, and allowed the four founders to take enough chips off the table that their families, multi-generation, would be set. And if we did it right, they would get another huge bite of the apple as well, and also would be a benefit to the organization, leave it the best possible hands. And really in October 2010, we sold just under 40%, 39.6% to private equity. So we didn't sell a majority because we wanted to be in the driver's seat.
I'm glad you bring that up, because at least from my experience, when you bring on a private equity partner, it's usually a majority sale to them. And so the owners that are left might roll 20 or 30% equity. You all kept a majority. How did you do that? That just doesn't seem like what private equity is usually willing to accept.
Actually, that was a model that kind of that fit very well with us, because you're right. A lot of the private equity firms, the ones I'm on boards with now, they tend to take a majority position, and maybe some of the founders stay in for 7 to 10 million of participation in dollar terms, but it's not a big percentage of the organization. This was an interesting model that came out of 2008, the financial crisis, when Lehman Brothers, right before they went under, they spun off Trilantic Capital Partners. So Trilantic Capital Partners has been around a long time, went out on their own, and their model was a minority model. Partner with strong founders, which is what a lot of the majority ones do, but partner with strong founders and just have some blocking rights to make sure they met their thresholds, but they forced you to grow, right? Because if you didn't grow, their 39.6% could grow in terms of that ultimate exit. But if you wanted them to just exit that, and then they had some minimal thresholds on their returns that they got. So it was a very good alignment of how we wanted to operate as an executive team, and particularly our founder. He wasn't going to be working for anyone else at this point. He'd been running this company for 27 years, growing it from nothing. But over the last 10 years, we'd really accelerated the growth and put this global platform together. So they were a perfect fit, and it was a fairly light board relationship. If, in other words, our requirements for the board, we had done quarterly meetings as an executive team, like just the founders. We did monthly and quarterly meetings with the management of the company. We shared financials. We did a lot of very progressive things that were going for 20 years ago. And one of the things we felt is we didn't want to change that culture. And we knew some things would change with going private equity. One of them would be is, yes, we're going to have an official board meeting, and there's going to be board members, which were our founder and myself, Tri-Atlantic members on the board. So we would meet quarterly. We would provide them financials monthly. The founder and I would do a monthly financial call. Quarterly, it was more of a dinner and a full day board meeting, similar to how boards operate today, no different. But it was a very light board, in other words, because they really just had a few protections and some blocking rights, but we were free to go execute our strategy. And from the first year we did it, the strategics came out of the woodwork after we did that deal. And so I don't even think we realized how much of an accelerant that would be for companies that wanted to buy us. And they wanted to buy us sooner than later because the number was probably only going to go one way, and that was up.
So those board meetings, I know Fortitech had such amazing success in the track record of growth. So did you ever get into any contentious topics in board meetings, or just because you guys were growing and executing so well, it's just checking the box and everything's great?
A lot of that was great. Most of it was, to be honest. We had probably contentious was 2 times. One was minor, one was maybe major. Minor was I got beat up every quarter over inventory. I would hit all the metrics and everything, and I would get beat up every quarter over inventory because they wanted less inventory. They wanted more turns. They're financial engineers, right? They want the best financial outcome for the company, and getting the balance sheet, not just the income statement, where it needs to be. The problem was with a premix business and you have multiple ingredients, could be from 3 to 46 ingredients or any product. If you're missing one ingredient, you don't sell that product. And I wish our customers were better at forecasting, because it would have made it a lot easier for my supply chain purchasing group and myself. I always erred on, I kept it lean. I tried to get turns every 46 days. There was no way I was taking that to monthly turn on inventory. I would have loved to. There was just no way I was going to do it. And they put that as a goal for me. And I was always 45 to 50 days. And I would say to them every quarter, guys, and if I have to miss this again next quarter, because I'm going to achieve all these other objectives. So that was only contentious part of the ongoing board meeting. I'll say the biggest contentious point was right after we did the PE deal, when less than a year, DSM came to us and they wanted to buy us. And they gave us a crazy number, but it was a little less than the PE multiple they wanted. I need at least 2.2 times, whatever, 3 times, whatever the PE firm's multiples were. It wasn't quite there, but we were literally less than 9 months of the deal, and they blocked us. And so up until that point, they had supported everything that we wanted to do, even the investing we were doing, throwing plants around the world. Let's go into Poland. We're going to put a plant in India. Oh, by the way, right after that, we're putting one in China. And we had all this stuff in works, and they blocked us, and it was a battle. It was a contentious board meeting. And then we left that meeting, we regrouped. We said, okay, let's just keep growing. We're not happy with it. It affected the relationship a little bit for a very short period of time. But we knew ultimately we were driving towards the same goal, right? Everybody was driving, the private equity firm, the founders of the company, our leadership team. And we had put in a stock incentive program that for sharing this next sale that would be strategic. But in hindsight, it actually worked positive, because they came back a year later. They knew what the number had to be and went above that number. And we would continue to show growth for another year. So it ultimately worked out for everybody, but it was a pretty contentious part of the board meeting.
That's interesting. I don't think I've heard that part of the story before. So it was really only a year from that board meeting where they blocked that offer. It was a year later that DSM acquired?
The private equity got the minority stake was in October of 2010. In December of 2012, outright sale of the company, 26 months. It's probably still one of their biggest success stories in terms of getting their return in the shortest period of time. Most private equity holders, you're talking a 4 to 5 year period to get the returns they want with our growth. But we were accelerating our growth, and market timing was right. And obviously, we got a multiple that's probably one of the precedents for where the multiples are in the nutrition industry today. And so it was good timing for all, and created a lot of people that put 7 digits in the bank that were at all different levels in the organization. So the founders were very generous about creating an opportunity for all. And obviously, I was one of the biggest benefactors of that in my role.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think if I remember right, the announcement when DSM made the acquisition came out at the Las Vegas trade show. Was that the right timing?
We announced it, and I can't remember if it was late November, early December, but the supply side west.
Yeah. Just maybe to wrap on the Fortitech part of the story, I know that you guys had a great winning culture, but how did you all work on that culture? What were you guys doing to really drive that culture of excellence?
Yeah, obviously a lot of that came from the founder. Very transparent, very open about communications, very direct. For me personally, I think it was all about communicating what priorities existed in the organization. And one of the things I did early on was I put together a little bit of a playbook for myself. It was based on a lot of things I'd learned at GE, a lot of things I learned at Case, C&H Global. And when I got to Fortitech, I realized I had a tremendous amount of responsibility for a lot of people's lives, right? There's a lot of people who worked for the organization. And I put this little thing together, and actually when I was thinking about getting ready for this call and just be able to talk to you, I remembered something. So I went back and looked, and I found 2 things. And one thing was this mug I got, okay? I saw a picture of this mug. It said priorities. And there's a picture of a 4-year-old kid. Now, if you saw my older son, Madison, at that age, he looked exactly like that. He had a pair of jeans like that. He had a striped shirt like that. And he was a blondie like that. And I remember picking it up, and I turned it around, and it was based on a book that was written, and it's all I ever learned, I learned in kindergarten. And it said 100 years from now will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove. But the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child. And it line things for me because it's about family, but business is family. The people you work with end up being family. So it's how do you align those priorities? And I realized early on that I had to communicate better, I had to lead better, I had to plan better, and I had to coordinate better. And I apologize for reading off this, but your questioning before we hopped on here to have this conversation was a little bit about what rule did you put in place or what did you do? And I really took that to heart. I wrote that down. I still have that in some planning documents that's in a notes thing on my computer. It used to be in a handwritten agenda and handwritten your goals and stuff. Because I think what happens is you really need to communicate, you really need to plan, you really need to lead, and then you really need to coordinate all those resources. And I think where a lot of organizations fall flat is they'll put communication in plan, but they're not really communicating. They say they're leading, but they're not really leading. Planning involves so many things. It's strategic. It's putting together multi-year plan. It's putting together your operating plan. It's putting together plans for your departments. And we started doing those things. We started putting performance objectives together for people. All these things in the organization that were maybe done in bigger organizations, we tried to adapt them to a very flexible, fast-moving culture and walking the talk. These individuals that were the founders they were going to their kids' soccer games. They were at hockey. They were at lacrosse. You name the sport, wrestling, whatever. And they set that culture in the organization. And obviously, there were things that took priority with the business, but we did what we could to align our priorities and allow our team members to align their priorities, both family and their professional objectives. And I think taking that holistic approach showing people that you care about them and that you're willing to work with them and understanding and valuing our differences. We used to joke around because we were actually asked questions. It could be BSF in a meeting, DSM, because we bought products from them. We were communicating all the time. They're like, how are you doing this? How is an organization your size with your people? We were looked at, I think, like the misfit toys on Christmas. But it was our misfit toy nature that drove us as an organization to be successful. And we adapted to that. And it's all about priorities. And we set priorities in our own lives. We set priorities for our business. And it's amazing how hard people would work to make that successful. Because the founder and myself, we're not going to be successful without people. And we're very fortunate to have all these great people. And we were very fortunate to be able to lead all these great people.
No, there's a few things there. One is we can't just go to work for a paycheck, right? That's not going to get you very far. And I think what you described there with that great quote is, like, I think about it as like, what is your anchor? What is your why? Like, why are you doing any of this stuff that is incredibly difficult to do? And I appreciate the comments about culture. The whole reason I spent 3 years trying to find a business to buy was to prove a culture very much in lines of what you just described. I think if you don't have some core set of values that is driving that, and try to do things purely for financial reasons, it's not going to work out.
I think it doesn't really settle in. It doesn't really drive the passion. Yeah, it's great to have financial metrics. It's great to have the opportunity to be successful in a profit business. But I think we took more of a surface service nonprofit approach. If we did all these things well and we drove the best value, the rest would take care of itself. And that is so important. And Nick, I know the culture you want to drive. I know how hard you looked to find a business. And I think you found a great business to lead. And I think you are building a great culture.
Yeah, so you and I could talk for 5 hours probably.
Yes, I think we could.
But I know you did several things after the DSM acquisition, but I want to fast forward to now your role as a board member, because I think that's really interesting. How do you think about your role as a board member, and maybe compare and contrast being a management team board member as your time at Fortitech, or a CEO board member, to now being an external board member that represents private equity or you individually? Maybe talk us through that.
Yeah, obviously the two active board roles I have going on right now, obviously one is with a company called Spraytech, who was also, I was a customer of theirs for a long time and got pulled in by one of the founders. And when he was making a decision to sell to private equity, which is Aurora Capital. So I am a fiduciary board member. It is a paid role and it has incentives and all that. And obviously working with Enzo Technologies, since you acquired St. Louis Communications, and board role, and that is also a fiduciary relationship. And for me, the ability to be able to come out of the meetings in the past when I was in a CFO, COO, CO role, and part of the board, but also part of the executive leadership team in leading, was I saw a direct relationship between the strategy going on, how to get out of the meeting and start executing it, and then working with, communicate, lead, plan, coordinate the resources they're going to reach the end line. And I was always used to, I always use this phrase, GSD, get stuff done. Not as necessarily pretty middle word on that. But I always had, that was my motto. I'm the guy getting stuff done. I'm part of an organization getting stuff done. Very tough transition to a board role. And I had other things I've been involved with over the last 10 years, whether it's been investments in helping other businesses start up. There's 5 or 6 other businesses I've been involved with. Very hard transition, to be honest with you, going from being somebody who did to somebody who needs to advise and mentor. But I've really taken that on as a challenge the last 3 years to align my life much more in line with the priorities I talked about early on. How do I be a better mentor and father, and became a grandfather last year? How do I do that from a distance? I'm not going to be telling them what to do. I'm here as a resource, as a sounding board. An emergency comes up, personal, financial, whatever it may be. Yeah, it's great I'm in the position I am to help them. But my bigger role is just helping them fulfill their life and do what they want with their family and their career. And I'm finding that I'm figuring out how to do that better in my board roles. And I do have some goals and aspirations within that. Like I definitely want to potentially be the chairman of a board and be a little more involved with the operations side, because I think I can have a bigger impact, but I'm still not doing it. It's still the CEO of that business and the executive leadership team. They're going to get it done. And so what I need to do is make sure that I'm giving the best advice I can. If I can make contacts, resources, they're presented with a problem, I may have addressed it a few times, or these are how we would have addressed it. Anything I can do to help the leadership teams be more successful, I'm trying to do, and trying to figure out where that's going to go next.
I've been fortunate to have been on boards pretty much my whole career, so
Right.
I'm used to it. But how would you talk to non-CEO executive team members that attend board meetings? How would you coach them to view these board members? Because you walk into these meetings, it could be very intimidating and scary. Who are these people? Are they here to figure out a way to fire me if I have a bad meeting? It's a fairly intimidating environment. So what would you say to those non-CEO executive team members that participate in board meetings?
I think I would be, when I'm trying to look at it from perspective, when I had the opportunity and fortune of attending some meetings early on, whether it's joint ventures or whatever, I always thought it's a little mystical who these people are, right? And that this is the board, and you get hyped up, you get a little nervous about coming into the meeting and stuff. I would say relax. You are doing what you do, your space. Prepare for the meeting. I'm not saying don't prepare. I'm not saying don't be organized, don't plan, you're in sales, you're in operations, whatever it may be. Yeah, you need to be prepared. But at the same time, these people have lived it. We've done things really well. We've made mistakes. We've adapted for mistakes. We've pushed through things. So we're a resource. We're 35 years, gray hair, we have a Rolodex of people. We have a Rolodex of business challenges that we faced. We are a resource. Like, pull from us. Ask us questions. Don't be afraid to shoot us an email. Obviously, coordinate within your leadership team. But there's a lot of value there besides just showing up for a quarterly board meeting. And how do you harness that? And so I would just say, and treat yourself. If you're in the meeting, you're a board member. For that board, it's not official, but you should be trying to contribute like you're a board member. Because eventually, if you move your career along, you will be.
Yeah, it's a challenge that we continue to navigate in what makes an effective board meeting for all of us. It's a real fine balance of, we want to come in there and report out to show all the work that we're doing. How valuable is that for you all to sit there and listen to us blabber for 6 hours? It doesn't really help you, and it doesn't help us.
I think you're being very progressive by implementing the ZEC deck and more information that comes out ahead of time, and not just a 50-page PowerPoint that we get the day before the meeting. So the fact that we're getting stuff the week before, can read it, can make comments, can digest it, can look at it, it allows us to, maybe recap those stuff in the meetings, but then dig down. Let's get to a deeper layer. What are the things that we really need to address in the business? How do we address it strategically? How do we address it with human resources, or whatever the challenge may be? It's how do we spend time communicating more effectively? And I think by having that information up front and taking a more progressive approach to it, I think you're going to lead to better outcomes for the business, and you're also going to move much quicker. Your velocity of business is going to allow you to move quicker, and I've seen that in the time we've been together here on this board.
And I did want to ask, it's a little bit of a step back, but we first really got to know each other when you joined the board of our family-owned company, and so I'm curious, how do you view the difference of being on the board or advisory board of a family-owned company that might intend to remain family-owned versus a private equity company that's driving towards a financial outcome?
I think for the advisory board or fiduciary board for a company, they all have a role to play, right? And I think setting up an advisory board for a family-run company that maybe plans on being multi-generational, I thought initially bringing in different constituents, right? Bringing in someone who was head of sales or eventually CEO of a fourth generation company, having somebody that came out of the industry that sold through private equity with a strategic exit, having somebody who had flipped a couple businesses like yourself and been involved with boards, working with the family to actually set the board up, I think was outstanding. I think it serves a purpose, but it's also, I think for me, somebody that's used to a pretty fast pace of change and moving things along very quickly, was also a little bit frustrating, and I think after doing 3.5 years, whatever it was on that board, I did have another commitment that I'd made with one of the founders of Fortitech to go do, and that was the reason I stepped off a number of things in 2018, one being the Jost board, the other being the CEO of Pernova out in Chicago, because I had made that commitment to the founder that if we got our first contract with this startup business, that we would go and do that. And that's what we did. But it also allowed me to reflect on that. But there's a different outcome there, and which is part of the family business. And being an advisor to that was great experience. And I enjoyed my time working with you particularly, and with a lot of the staff I had to interact with. And I thought we did some great things, and obviously put a facility over in Europe and use contacts and all the things that I want to be doing as a board member. I really first, as an independent board member, that was the first place I experienced some of those things. So it was a great feeling for me, and I was very proud of the opportunity, very thankful for the invite from you, from obviously the founder of that company. And it was a great experience, but it did test my ability that always wants to jump in and do stuff versus advising stuff. That was challenging for me. And obviously, I think we probably had an hour-long conversation before every board meeting as we drove over to go to it, talking about some of that stuff, because but we were there to do an advisor role, and I tried to do that advisor role the best I could, even though I may have personally done things differently, but that wasn't my role.
Yeah, it was quite the experience. But maybe I'm glad you reminded me, probably the biggest achievement that we did was that plant in Poland. The founder did have this vision of wanting to go international, and probably over a 3-year period, we put together a lot of plans that supported making the investment.
Yeah, it was probably the biggest accelerant of growth and change was during that time period, right?
Absolutely. And I remember the day that I shook hands with the farmer who owned the land that we ended up buying and putting the plant on. That was in the top 2 or 3 best professional days I ever had. So it was good fun.
Yeah, no, and I still get an email before every Christmas from someone who we put in there to build the plant, who still runs there, and someone that I've known a long time and helped us put plants in Europe and in India as well. And yeah, it was special for me too, because I was able to use a lot of my expertise, and there was a lot of trust from you and the family to go where we went, because decided to avoid doing a full search process that companies paid for. And I'm on a current board, another board that we did that to do a search to where to go in Europe. We ended up in the same country. We haven't pulled the trigger on execution, but I thought it was ironic that 10 years later, it's still the same outcome. But it was pretty exciting back in 2018, 15 to 18 to be part of that. And I'm very proud of my time on the board with you there, Nick.
Yeah, it was good fun. So maybe in just the last couple minutes here, so what are you up to these days that's not work related? What do you spend your time doing?
I've been spending a lot of time the last month and a half connecting with my wife, who's on a sabbatical from UAlbany. And we did a trip of a lifetime. It was our 35th anniversary, and we spent 6 weeks traveling from Hawaii to New Zealand to Fiji, to a cruise line across Fiji, New Caledonia, to the north coast of Australia, ended up in Bali, spent 10 days in Bali for Chinese New Year's, moved on to Singapore and Melbourne, Australia. So we were traveling for 60 days, and 45 days of it was, almost 50 days of it was pure vacation and reconnecting. And we've been married 35 years. And we've had a lot of great vacations over our life with family, but most of them are taken when the kids had breaks from school or August. And January was a month we decided to get married in a destination wedding back in 1990. We actually went to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Not the warmest place in the world, but it used to be a little warmer back then. And we did a destination wedding before destination weddings were popular in mid-January. Never thinking about how hard it would be to ever take a vacation again during our anniversary, because I was always in the CFO or COO or CEO role. And I always worked for a company that was a calendar year. So it was always the end of the year. We were doing the budget for the next year. We're rolling out the strategy. I'm visiting plants. We were very lucky if we could just have dinner. And my wife was a university professor, research professor at University of Albany. And the spring semester always started around January 18th. So we were actually talking about it on this trip. The last time we had physically taken a vacation during our anniversary, other than going out to dinner, was our 20th. And our sons were playing soccer, and their premier soccer team, Blackwatch from Albany, was heading to England to play in some of the stadiums and play some matches against similar age groups. They were in the 14, 15, 16 under age group. And we actually decided not to go. And we were involved in everything. I wasn't coaching at that point. They had moved on to play for a premier coach to get ready for college. But we decided not to go, and we took a trip back to Mexico. We had gone on our honeymoon 20 years earlier. And so it was really nice to really reconnect this year. And then what else I'm doing is been involved with being a grandfather for the first time. Last May, Ellie was born, my younger son, and really taken advantage of connecting with the boys. But professionally, I think it's a balance now. And that's really the key for me, because when we sold Fortitech, I was too young to retire, but I still feel I'm too young to retire. And my wife is still working as a full professor, and we've had some advantages that she's on a sabbatical and writing a book, and doing some research and taking a little bit of a different schedule from her day to day. So it's how I align all those things going forward is what I'm really focused on. And I think I mentioned earlier to you, one of the companies I thought I'd be doing consulting work for is holding back a little bit this year with what's going on in the U.S. economy, geopolitically, for a variety of reasons. So it's actually afforded me a little more time just to focus on the two boards that I'm involved with, and hopefully getting more involved with both of those. But we'll see.
That's amazing, Brian. I really appreciate you sharing your story with me and the parts of it that I didn't know. And congratulations on an amazing career that continues. And I certainly appreciate all the support you've been to me throughout the years.
Nick, awesome. I appreciate literally from the day we've met at that breakfast and the relationship that we've developed. And we could talk for 5 more hours here. But I think at the end of the day, I think we have a lot of the same values in a lot of areas. And I think that's what makes this connection so important. And I know we have the same priorities, and that's really what life's about.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, I appreciate you talking, and I'm glad you got to be the first guest on our podcast.
I'm very honored to be your first guest. I'm very excited. Hopefully not the last time I'm on.
Probably not.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Brian.